I receive a professor's salary, and I'll retire on a professor's pension. I acknowledge my tobacco industry funding. But what I want to do is publish research that can't be challenged in the same way that that this study was challenged.
So let me ask you this: is it, so to play both sides of this for a second, if your critics try to delegitimize your research and your criticism of others' research because some money comes from that industry and goes to the university you work for, how is it any different than government funding going to Dr. Glantz to the tune of tens of millions of dollars? And it's not just that, but his entire persona, much like most progressives, their politics and their persona and their sense of who they are is wrapped up in their political activism. So it seems to me that Dr. Glantz is an activist because that's how he really did start, as an activist. And I bet you in his heart, he will say he's an activist. And so he's an activist researcher conducting activist science that's funded in the tens of millions by the US federal government. So that's got to have just as much of a bias effect, or at least some kind of an effect on the research.
NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the US, are the dominant source for all research conducted at universities and colleges across the nation. Now, you have to make a connection, though, because the federal government in the US is intent on creating what they call a tobacco-free world. And so the NIH is simply the funding arm of that strategy. And so grant supporters, or the academicians at universities, submit grants with that type of thing in mind. And so I believe there is inherent bias introduced by that funding.
Right, because there's a strategy. So that's the cloud there that you can get behind, get around it, is because, well, our government strategy is to promote this particularly really good public health thing, and that's, zero tobacco use. That's our strategy. But then all research then has to come up and work towards that effort and that goal. So that doesn't make it good research. It just makes it party line research.
Correct.
I call it totalitarian science, but...
I couldn't possibly comment, Brett.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah. Well, but just make sure everybody hears that. Totalitarian science. It just sounds perfect. It just really, really describes it. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up. There is another question I'd like to ask with regard to this Glantz thing. Now, it's a bit in the weeds, but it lifts up really quick. And that's this issue that, well, let me ask you the question instead. Is it not typical that good science needs to be replicable? Like, other scientists need to be able to try to replicate your findings? And so is this study something that has been set up to do that? Or is this whole data issue makes that completely moot? And I find that pretty convenient if that's the case.
No, his science can be replicated. This study can be completely replicated. And that's the goal of all science.